All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Kirsten Cowan, and as mentioned, I'm the 4-H agent up here in Passaic County in North Jersey. And what I'm going to chat with you guys about today, very long academic name, but how we work in communities with professionals and partnerships and our dedicated volunteers who have been doing this for a very long time and sometimes aren't happy that times have changed, and how we navigate that because it can be challenging depending on your role and your position. So before we dive in fully, this is our Injustice for All poster. Extension programming, as you guys all know, is for everyone in our community. So a little bit about me and why this topic kind of became very important to me is my background is education, animal science, went to vet school for a second, decided that was not for me, and then ran a large equine facility in Westchester, New York. And I was brought in as an outsider to a really solid staff. I would have to say, even now looking back, anyone on that staff would be capable of taking over the director and manager position. And I was brought in as an outsider of a really large facility, and it was hard adapting to that or figuring out how I fit in and how we could move that staff and that program forward in a positive direction. There was a lot of resistance to change and wanting to know why the change. So I quickly had to adapt my communication skills, and that served me really well in the future with my current career. So I, as stated, I was an agent with Maryland. Before that, I was actually an agent with Colorado as well. It was never the plan to bounce around. Life kind of happened. And something I love about Extension is we are everywhere throughout the country. So that really served me well throughout my life. And all three of my counties that I've served have been vastly different. So this kind of thinking and wide angle approach to conversation has served me well, and why I put it together in a presentation. So before we dive into all of that, we have to think, why are we doing this? So why are we as extension professionals working with our community? Yes, it's our job, but there usually is a deeper why. If we were in a group together right now, we'd have poster paper up on the wall and post-it notes at your table, and everyone could write their why and share it out, and then we talk about it all. For the emphasis on time today, I have created some of the most common responses I've received. If people have otherwise and would like to put it in the chat or unmute and talk, I would say go for it. But after running this a few times, here's some of the whys I get from extension professionals or community serving professionals. So if you're 4-H or you work with youth, we do it for the kids. Hopefully, some of us have fun doing what we do. We teach, we like to learn new things to help others. Of course, our main answer should be to bring the research from our land grant out to the community, help our community, ensure others have the opportunity that maybe we didn't have or we did have to make a difference and to inspire. Does anyone else have other whys of why they do what they do? Mhm. And if not, that's good. It's a pretty wide lens. So USDA NIFA also has a definition of why we do what we do. So extension over time has adapted to changing times and landscapes. Fewer than 2% of American farms are living today. Only 17% of Americans now live in rural areas, yet the Extension Service plays a significant role in American life. All rural, urban, and suburban, with its unprecedented reach and office in or almost near our nation's approximately 3,000 counties. Extension agents help farmers and ranchers achieve greater success, assist families with nutrition, home economics, and prepare tomorrow's or today's youth to become the leaders of tomorrow, which is a pretty awesome job, I think, but also a huge role and huge weight we put on our shoulders. The cool thing is about extension, though, is we don't do it alone, and we can't and shouldn't do it alone. So we work with a lot of community partners, no matter what agent or what side of extension you're in. None of us is doing this work solely by ourselves sitting in an office. We work with local foundations, other county agencies, school districts, if you're working with youth, after school programs, volunteers, not just with 4-H, but our master gardeners, our land stewardship, community nonprofits, business associations, small businesses across the county are serving, fair boards, and so many more. So no matter who you are, we rely on working with others and working with teams. But which is wonderful. But the problem can run into is when we have a really well-established team and we've been doing the same thing for a while, it's easy to either have yourself as a professional or as a community fall into the rut. So an easy example of this is anyone have a community partnership or an annual event that just runs every year, kind of no matter what's going on, it's going to happen. From the 4-H world, I always pull county fair. I love county fair. It just runs every year. A lot of work goes into it, but we know it's going to happen. An example I talk about that maybe isn't serving the community would be an ag event my old county used to run. It originally started out with a great partnership. It made total sense. But after running it for 30 years, it wasn't necessarily serving the community anymore. So the next thing as extension professionals we have to think about is, do you take the time to evaluate the why behind those partnerships, those programs that you're doing? Especially when you first start in a community, typically you run a needs assessment so you can get a really good idea of what the community wants, what your partners are, and what the plan is moving forward. But after that needs assessment's established, are you going back? Are you evaluating? Are you really digging into it? If it's worth the time and effort, if it's still serving that goal, and should it continue or does it need to look a little different? For example, we're not canceling county fairs, right? Like there might be colleagues around the state that would enjoy that, but like they're going to continue. But could they continue in a way that's genuinely serving the needs of our community? So this is our extension person who's like, there's not enough hours in the day to get the reporting done or that grant application submitted. Um, so you need to take a really wide angle lens look at it. A very practical solution that, or example I like to give for this is when I did run that horse barn. We had 130 horses, a bunch of different guys feeding them and girls feeding them, working with them. And I was very frustrated with how the horses were being fed. I felt it was inconsistent because my scoop of grain is different than your scoop of grain is different to the Saturday morning scoop of grain. So consistency was a problem. I had asked them questions, didn't like the answers. And one night I was like, you know what? I'm the manager. I'm going to put my foot down. I'm making this change. I'm investing this money. We're going to redo it. It's just how it is. I'm the manager. I'm going to say how it's going to go. I was frustrated. I was tired. And then I put all the things that I needed to do how I wanted to do it into my little cart, Dover Saddlery, buy stuff. And it was going to be over $500 to revamp the system. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll sleep on this and ask more in the morning. And when I did that, when I approached a situation that I was frustrated with some curiosity, with new perspective, I got different answers than I had been given the first time. And actually, how I wanted to invest a lot of money and change, they had already done. And it didn't work out for many reasons. So that laid for a better conversation. So when I was tired and frustrated, instead of trying to make snap decisions, coming at it from new lens and being more curious about the outcome served me very well. When I think about what we do in extension, I think about an equilateral triangle. So we have our extension needs, our community partner needs, and the needs of our community. When all of those are coming to the table in an equal way, is where we're going to find the most success, especially in a facility like Rutgers where there are tenure track faculty. What we have, what we do, the expectations on us can be quite large. So showing up to events that are important to the community may not fit into the Form 1C as much as we wish it would. Something that's really important to the community partner and their needs might not actually fit the greater needs of the community. And when that happens, our equilateral triangle starts to look a little bit more like this. So it's not equal. You're finding success-ish. Like it's not a bad thing, but you're not as successful as you could be when all the needs are out of line and nothing's really quite working. So if you have a community partner, an event that's made changes in recent history that's aligned, that's fantastic. Every year you get done with a program, you have a debriefing meeting, you talk about what went well logistically, but also what could be different, what could be better, who's not at the table and who should be at the table having these communications. So when we do that, we start with that huge wide angle lens. And hopefully if this all happens organically and you don't have to be the enforcer that really does pull everyone together, but you start looking about the needs of the community. So is the event you're running meeting those needs? Is the partnership you're putting time and effort into meeting the needs of the community? Is it meeting the goals of extension and the goals of the community partner? And if that all happens, great. As I said, if not, what do you do, right? Because that's not great. It doesn't feel comfortable. It feels kind of stuffy in the relationship. So how do you adapt? How do you change? So if it's not currently meeting the needs, you have a few things. You can have a conversation with them and be like, hey, I noticed that we could do X, Y, and Z differently. I think it'd be important if we figure out how to get this community of individuals to attend our event, or if we do outreach at this library, or maybe pull in these professionals for continuing education. If your community partner or event planner says, that sounds excellent, great idea, let's do it. Perfect. Life is great. Sometimes we don't get that response though. Sometimes we get, but that's how we've always done it, right? Like we've always done it that way. Why would we change? Why do we need to be different? And when I first started hearing this phrase, I became very frustrated because to me, I was like, that's fine. It's fine that that's how you've always done it, but it doesn't have to continue that way. Unfortunately, to those individuals that like to say this, it does mean it has to continue that way. There's no other option for them. So, how do you navigate that in a professional way that makes you look professional and like a leader in the community, but also doesn't drive you crazy on the inside when you're back at your desk trying to push things forward to meet the needs of your community, do what extension needs to do, what you need to do for your Form 1C, and also keep community partnerships going because we want to work with our community. Yes. So slight tense, that's my interpretation of myself at the end of the table after some fair board meetings and then back at the office, like, we just got to figure this out. So for me, when I hear this phrase and then the book I'm going to talk about, which is what sparked this whole thing, is there's three big reasons why we typically hear this. So when you hear the phrase, but that's how we've always done it, sometimes there's a good reason, right? So I had another county fair friend who had drainage problems at their county fair, and the county wanted to come in and reroute the water system, and that sounded great. But the way they were going to reroute it was actually how it was routed a decade ago. So they already had it done one way and it didn't work. So they changed it to the current way. So they want to keep it the current way because it was the lesser of all evils of what they had. So spending the time, money, and infrastructure to reroute it back to how it used to done it wouldn't have been helpful. So they're doing it that way for a good reason. And then this way has always worked. So why change? If something's working, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? So this can be tricky to navigate. We'll talk about how to have those conversations. But the idea of having a conversation to justify, explain, find understanding of why you want something to look a little different and move forward is key there. And the third reason is a genuine fear or just refusal to change. This is my show. This is my event. This is how we've always done it. My way or the highway type of attitude. And that's where it gets tricky. So when you hear those, again, back to the number three, I think you have three options. I think the easiest, but not necessarily serving your community, is accept it and forget it. Okay, this isn't the hill I need to die on. This isn't the battle I need to pick. We're going to accept it and move on. There's other ways I can program. There's other ways I can serve. We're going to let this one go. So sometimes the easiest, not necessarily doing our due diligence though. The second is get frustrated, get annoyed, force your perspective. So back to me in the horse barn situation, I was going to spend all that money and get it done my way because I thought my way was the best way without further conversations. So that is an option, right? You can choose that. However, that's going to be one of the quickest ways to erode trust with your community. And when so much of what we do is based on community buy-in and that trust, this is a great way to ruin that. And then the third way is to respond with curious conversation, a buzzword, deep listening for transformative leadership conversation. And we're going to dive into deep listening first and then curious conversation. So the idea of deep listening is listening beyond active listening. So when we teach kids, we talk about active listening all the time. But deep listening goes beyond because not only are we listening and paying attention to what someone's saying, we're processing that information, we're also paying attention to the mindset and disposition and kind of attitude of the person we're talking to, because how they're approaching us, how they're saying things, the words they're using, the tone they're using is going to go a long way to continuing that conversation forward in a positive way, or maybe deciding that this conversation needs to be tabled for another day because emotions can run high depending on the event you're running. Another definition of deep listening is it requires that mindset of curiosity. Obviously, curious conversations, curiosity is right there in the definition, but the idea of being interested genuinely in what the other person is saying, not that you have to agree with them, but you're interested in what they're saying and where they're coming from. And at this time, you're not judging or evaluating their thoughts or actions. You're really trying to find that root understanding of their perspective. And for me, curious conversations, where we're going to spend the rest of today, is all built on respect. And respect is a two-way street. We teach our kids that all the time and our volunteers that, but it really is true. So the curious conversation allows you to have that respectful conversation that doesn't lead to conflict in theory, and a challenging conversation where you're invested in the outcomes. So the conversations aren't necessarily going to be easy. Sometimes they are. Sometimes it's a really quick check in, explain your point of views, and everyone's good. When we have individuals, partnerships in our communities that are really stuck, and we've always done this for 100 years, we're not going to change for anyone. It's a challenge. And to overcome that, work through it, problem solve it, you have to come at it from a place of curiosity and really be invested in that outcome. Because if you're not invested, the other person's going to know, and there's no chance that they're going to soften their take to even just hear you. Because the goal here is to have them also eventually become curious into why you're coming from your perspective, which is all great. But how do we do this? So when I was early in my career, I found a book by Kathy Taberner. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I have it listed at the end, but it's The Power of Curiosity. And she talks about all these skills about how to become more curious in your work. And it's meant for high-level executives, but I think it fits our extension model perfectly. So the first thing we're going to break down is the curiosity skills wheel. And just like extension, there are acronyms, so it's perfect. And the first skill to really think about and master is to be present and absorb. And the second is to choose how to listen. When I teach this to the kids, because you can choose how to listen, right? We're all on a virtual webinar right now. We could all be checking emails, looking at our Amazons, looking at the weather for tomorrow, checking on Qualtrics. So we can choose how we show up and listen. And we can also choose the type of questions we ask. And hopefully we're asking those curious, open questions. And then back to be present and absorb. So absorb stands for your attention, your body language, your tone of voice, the stop and focus, being open to understanding, not judging, repeat through paraphrases, and become the gremlins. And I think as professionals working in this industry, we've probably heard a lot of these already, but I like the examples that she gave. So attention means, are you obviously actually actively paying attention to the person you're talking to? Or if they're coming to you with a grievance or a concern about something you've done, are you on your phone? Are you checking emails? Are you talking to a volunteer off their shoulder? Are you constantly looking at your computer screen? Are you really paying attention to them? Your body language and tone of voice. I'm originally from New Hampshire, spent a lot of time in New York. So I tend to talk a little fast, have a broader stance, can be a little sarcastic or have a harsher tone of voice when that's not my intention. But that's how I come off. And I've learned this as a professional. And I have to be cognizant of that, especially when we head into more conflict-ridden conversations or more serious conversations. So being aware of your body language and tone of voice when you're approaching these is important. The next one is stop and focus. This is one that I've used more recently. I had a volunteer who was not happy about something. She really wanted to talk to it, but I had an appointment in 15 minutes and I knew that I couldn't give her the time and attention that this needed, that she needed and deserved as a professional and a volunteer. So the answer to that was, I want to talk about this. Can we find another time? Can we find a time after work on the weekend, because we're extension, so our hours are wonky, that fits into your schedule? Because I want to give you the time and attention you deserve. I just can't right now. They don't always love to hear that, but a lot of times they appreciate that you are giving it the attention it deserves, they feel it deserves, and they feel heard and respected, which I think is half the battle. The O stands for open and understanding, not judging. So the example I give for this one often is a state I worked in didn't require our horseback riding kids to wear helmets. I personally do not agree with this. I did not teach kids when they were not wearing helmets, but that was a rule, and that was something a lot of my volunteers were very passionate about. So I had to have conversations with them where I had to be open to understanding their why behind that and work very hard not to judge. And as a professional, that was hard for me. And I don't end up agreeing with them, but we had productive conversations about it and where we could work with the rules and kind of build them up towards our riders being as safe as possible. The R stands for repeat through paraphrase, especially if you have a community partner, a volunteer, a community member, a professional that's looking to get something and doesn't like your answer, that comes at you with a lot of emotion. They might not even know what they're saying in the moment. So you trying to understand, repeating back through paraphrase can be really helpful. because make sure that you're following them. Because especially when people are angry or heated, tangents can happen and there's side quests that go on. So if you can repeat through paraphrase so you really understand what the root of the problem is, the conversation is going to go so much better. And then become the gremlins is my favorite one. So the gremlins are the little voice that live inside your head that kind of do the back talking, side conversations when you're having a conversation with someone else. So if someone's asking you about a rule change that got made or a new policy that got put into place, say the volunteer background check, for example, that's always hard when that gets implemented with a university or a state. And someone comes at you upset about that, you're not worried that they're upset about you about 5 other things. You're just focusing on that moment, that issue, that person, and you're not letting the self-doubt and back of your brain talk get in the way of the conversation you're trying to have. The next is choose how to listen. So on this one, you can actively choose how you listen. So you can ignore the speaker. We've all been in the room where we've been presenting or talking on something, and the people in the audience are just outright ignoring you for many reasons. Sometimes they don't care. Other times there's just a lot of stuff going on in their life that day, and that happens sometimes. Or maybe they're presenting after if it's at a national conference. So they want to be there and be present for you, but they are thinking about their next presentation. The other one is you can focus on yourself as a listener. So if someone is coming at me with a problem, and I'm focusing on me as opposed to them. The example is, well, I think you should do this, right? Like I'm putting my thoughts and opinions onto what they're coming at as a problem. So, or I would have never made that choice, right? That's not super helpful, even if it might be true. That's not necessarily a helpful approach to move a conversation along when it's not the most positive or it's a little bit of a challenging conversation. You want to make sure you're helping them and just making sure they feel heard as opposed to putting your thoughts, your beliefs kind of in their mouth. Number 3 is focus on you as the speaker. So that is someone comes at you with, they missed a deadline to get into the pesticide training class, right? That needs to happen for licensing. And you immediately said, well, you should have done X, Y, and Z. You should have set an alarm in your phone. You should have been on top of things. You should have gotten the check in the mail sooner. You should have done this. Also, not the most positive conversation. That's not a great way to solve the problem. It might be true. We all miss deadlines. We all should remember things better. Life happens sometimes. So by taking that you approach is also not going to help the conversation move forward. Number 4 is where we're almost there. We focus on understanding. So you're going to be listening and asking questions that helps you understand the situation a little bit better. And then number 5 is where this book and this text thinks we should all be at. I think extension flips between 4 and 5, where it focuses on us. How is we as a partnership, as a relationship in the community, as a productive community in general, move forward? How do we understand this problem and we move things in a positive direction? Does this mean someone else needs to take on yelling at me? There we go. Or how do we bring different entities to the table to move everything forward? So it's more of a community feeling, which is, I think, where extension stays a lot of the time. And the last kind of thing in the curiosity skills wheel is to ask curious questions. And this is where I find you can build the most trust because you're not just dismissing people, you're not ignoring them, you're not giving a quick answer. You're trying to figure out more of where they're coming from. So just like there's lots of ways to listen, there's lots of ways to ask questions and how we present ourselves in these more challenging conversations. So the first one the text talks about is like a closed question. So the answer to that would be like, do you want to take this class or not? Yes or no, right? Very plain and simple. It's not inviting more conversation. It's a yes or no, black and white answer. Sometimes that's totally appropriate. Other times in a more challenging conversation, the person you're talking to is going to feel shut down and feel like you don't care, even though you might just be busy doing a million things. We try to stay away from closed conversations unless it's like, are you coming to this meeting? You know, you haven't RSVP'd yet, right? That's a pretty simple closed question. The next type is a judging closed question. So it takes it even more. So you have someone that is thinking about doing a professional development workshop or going up for a grant or another really cool opportunity. And your question is, do you really want to do that? Right? So like it's yes or no, kind of some judgment there. And it's easy when you're moving fast to do this completely by accident and not even be aware. You just think you're confirming, right? You're just moving, you're asking questions, you're getting things done. And it comes off with that twinge of judgment. And we want to try to avoid that, especially when having conflicting conversations. Curious open question is where this text says we want to be at, and I agree. I think it works great in getting people to continue to talk and figuring out the root of where their anger or resistance to change really is. So an example of how to ask a curious and open question is like, what do you think about doing this professional development? Or why were you interested? Right? Helping them think through. So it's not just a yes or no. If you're working with teens, sometimes the answer is because I thought it'd be cool. Hopefully they give you a little bit more. And when you're working with community partners and producers out in the field, it's, oh, what aspect of your farm did you think this would serve? Or was there a concern that you had on your farm that you think this education was needed? Because then you know more information to help support them down the line as well. Other types of questions you can ask are leading open questions. So what kind of positives do you think would come out of this? What are you going to do with this information? Those type of things. So you kind of know the answer, right? If it's a class about water safety or soil erosion, the information they're going to get out of that is, how to make sure their water is safe and that our soil is not eroding efficiently, right? So we kind of know the answer. You're leading them on. It can be helpful for making sure the conversation stays as positive as possible. And then to round us out, you can have a judging open question. So if something doesn't go well, or maybe a trip is more expensive than someone planned, or an investment for their farm or their industry is more expensive, the question might be put of like, how could you think that was a good opportunity? Like, why did you think you should even try that? Right. So it's an open question. You're hoping for more information, but there's definitely that level of judgment that we want to be avoiding. And again, I think an extension, a lot of times I've heard these type of questions asked. It's not with malicious intent, right? It just kind of happens. We're sometimes in our own world and things come out. So just being aware, we want to lead with curiosity first so we can dig deep and get more information. You're kind of like we are all scientists and data gatherers, but you're on a scavenger hunt gathering all the data you need to help combat the gut reaction of not wanting to even entertain the idea of change. So the official definition of curious open questions, and that I really like, the buzzwords that I like, is creating that navigational system for a conversation. So you're opening up the territory in the field for them to talk and feel safe and comfortable having these type of conflict charged conversations with you, because you're offering a space for reflection that will hopefully lead to rich learning. Again, we're data mining here. We're getting as much information as possible. And the space that you create supports inclusion and engagement and encourages active listening from the other person as well. So hopefully they hear where you're coming from. And they're asked curious open questions. Most of the time we feel supported and that our perspectives are appreciated. So whenever I had to deal with a larger issue in my community, I didn't need everyone to agree with me on my stance and what I did, but my goal was to really hope everyone could at least see where I was coming from and gain some understanding. So at the end of the day, I might still make a decision that they don't like, and that's okay. I just really hoped that I was transparent and communicated clearly that they could see where I was coming from. And then they could still completely disagree with me. That's okay. But hopefully they could find that mutual respect where they could see the thought process and see how we got at the end goal that we got to. So yeah, and that feels supported, and then their perspectives are appreciated are a huge part of that, because that's how you're going to continue to build community, even amongst the community partners that you have, especially if you're trying to make a transformational change where there's some resistance to it. So with that, it's a balancing act. Again, if we were here in a room, we'd all be at tables right now, and I would give all of you a puzzle, and I would say, solve the activity. And I would just leave it at that. I'd be vague. Some people in the room would ask, what activity are you solving? Which would make total sense because those instructions were awful. I just told you to solve the activity. Some people would just dive in and complete the puzzle till you get the picture that's supposed to be on the front of the puzzle, which makes total sense, right? Because I gave you a puzzle. Why wouldn't you solve it or put it together in a puzzle way? And after all the tables had completed, I would have told you to open up the envelope that was in your puzzle, and it would tell you something that your community needed in this exercise. So sometimes the community needed the puzzle to be solved to show the sea animal picture that was on it, because my puzzle has sea animals. So there in that job, you completing that puzzle, as you assumed it should be completed, was meeting the needs of your community. Other puzzles had something drawn on the back. I think one of them has a flower drawn on the back with a Sharpie, and your community envelope would say that community needed a picture of a flower. So you went off your instinct, you created the picture of the puzzle, but you didn't ask questions, you didn't get curious with the assignment, and had you known, you could have just flipped the puzzle over, and then you would have met the needs of your community. Others were like, create the tallest tower, create the longest train, but it's just an activity to think that sometimes things that look very simple um, aren't, and there's more to the story. So we want to approach conflict, we want to approach resistance, to change with that curiosity of really figuring out what the task is before we dive in. Because if we dive in too far and get too far down the road, it's even harder then to backtrack and continue to move, the real goals of what we're doing forward in a positive way. So back to this one, our uneven triangle. So once we do all of that, because I know it sounds very nice in theory, right? We can sit here and talk about a book that I read that I thought was inspirational, and it gave us all these things that we can do, and then all our problems are fixed, right? We know that's not always going to be the case. We know nothing fits into a nice, tidy box. So after these discussions, after these hard conversations, hopefully they're not hard, but sometimes they are, kind of what's the next step? Like, what do you do if people still aren't thrilled, if they still double down and go, no, this is how we've always done it, we're not changing? There are some options. And this is where you, as an extension professional, have to figure out what works best for you. And what works best for you might not work for me, might not work for someone else. So hopefully by this time you've had some conversations with the entities that you need to have conversations with. You've explained yourself, you've figured out where they're coming from, and hopefully there's a little bit of a compromise that can be made. Hopefully, if they really want to stick to, I'll choose the ag day that I gave example at the beginning, they really wanted to stick to the old heritage ag that was really important for our community. And where I was coming from in that situation is the youth and community members, it was families as well, that used to be able to get transportation to our event no longer did, because the county bus system routes got severely decreased. So we weren't getting the turnout that we needed, and we weren't reaching the members of community that we really wanted to reach, that didn't have access to ag or these type of community events in their neighborhoods. So that bus line we relied on to get them to us, right? To help reduce that barrier of transportation. So I came at it originally of like, we need to change the day of the event or the location of the event or the things we're offering to make it more flashy for the families to want to come out, to find a way to come out. My community partners didn't want to. They've been running that forever. It makes total sense, but where can that compromise come from? And we were able to work with some grant funding and figure out a way to provide busing and also some new options, new activities, new education for the communities that they found more relevant at that time, and still honor the traditional ag that had taken place in our county for a very long time. So the Maryland tobacco farming was huge. They were able to still have their demos for that. And we could bring in some more current day relevant needs that we felt our community needed. So there was a really nice compromise to be had there. And it took 2 years of talking to get it done, but we got there in the end, and it was really successful. But sometimes that doesn't go that way. So what do you do then? Sometimes the answer is the partnership just kind of slowly dissolves. It doesn't need to be this big dramatic, we're no longer working together. An example I talk about for this is in my first county, there's a wonderful Master Gardener program, and there was a site there that just wasn't really meeting the needs of where that Master Gardener program wanted to go in, as far as how they were maintaining the garden, the type of plants they were planting, the xeriscaping, all of that. So there didn't need to be this big dramatic blow up, like we weren't going to not service the garden anymore, but those volunteers that were really dedicated there continued to serve it. And then over the years, as those volunteers' priorities changed, they decided they couldn't have as many hours to dedicate anymore. They just slowly stopped, and the garden kind of went back to the community that it was at. And then the Master Gardeners were no longer technically involved, and that was okay for everyone. The community understood they were okay. It wasn't a priority for them anymore. Our master gardeners didn't feel like something was taken away from them. So it was just a very natural, slow disintegration of the partnership that worked out for both sides. And I think it was actually, in a weird way, very positive. And then sometimes, if people still won't change, it's hard to have the discussion. But if the goals just are not aligned, sometimes it's okay to go separate ways or to choose a different event or a different priority to spend your time and energy on. And this is easier when it's a small event. It's harder when it's a large portion of your community or a larger event. So this is obviously last ditch efforts. It is okay to move away from things, but trying to find that compromise, I find, is always helpful, especially here in extension with the education focus. We can always try to carve out a corner or an activity that can bring the education to the community as part of a larger event. But definitely reach out to supervisors, because ending a partnership that's not aligning and not working is probably going to be healthier for both sides anyways in the long run, even if it's painful in those initial moments. So the goal is that hopefully we have an equilateral triangle again. All our needs are being met. We're meeting the needs of our community. We're getting everything we need to do as extension professionals. And we have really awesome community partners and producers that are doing great work. So that is always the goal. I don't know if we always get there, but that's what we're working towards. And then what I always think in those moments where I start to hit challenges is, do I want to be the Hulk or do I want to be Inspector Gadget, right? I might know better. I could just push my way through the wall and saying it's my way or the highway. This is what we're going to do. I'm the county agent. It's an option. It's there. Is that going to serve you best in the long run? Or can we get really curious and get creative and rely on our friends and colleagues and figure out a way to problem solve where there can be a compromise? There can be some middle ground where all three sides of that triangle is being served. I would say that's the harder route sometimes, but the longer success you're going to have. So short-term pain to figure it out, to find that compromise, to have those conversations with everyone, to get the buy-in, to build the trust, to kind of re-navigate that ship, whatever phrase you want to use. But long-term, it's going to serve your community more efficiently. Your time is going to be spent more efficiently. And hopefully the community partner kind of grows and builds with you as well and brings it along. And then the biggest tips I can give you is be sincere. All of these, there we go, be sincere. All of these conversations have to come from a point of sincerity, because the person you're talking to and having that harder conversation with is going to know if you're not sincere. They're going to know if you're just going through the motions. So we always have to approach these harder moments with complete sincerity. With curiosity, we genuinely have to want to know where they're coming from so we can find that middle ground when appropriate. It can be frustrating, so we're going to stay curious even when it doesn't go our way the first 2 to 3 to 5 conversations we have with them. And along with that, we're going to be patient, because change is hard. We've heard that a lot. Even before COVID, change was hard, and I think it's even harder now after. So be patient, be a positive member of the community, and keep trying to find that understanding, that buy-in, so we can kind of re-steer the activity, the event, the partnership, whatever you're working on, in that positive direction. And when you can't, it's okay. It's okay to let it go and figure out to be in a better used way. And then all the fun sources. The very last one, Kathy Taberner's book, is what this is all based off of, most of it. And I found she had a lot of really good actionable things to think about if we have a free moment or two. And then on this one, if you scan it, I threw the workbook that she has publicly available on her website in the resource folder. That just has some worksheets. That's kind of, I don't know, I found them very enjoyable to work through when I was having a bigger problem. It helped me have that wide angle lens of the issue and then make my questions and conversations I had with the entities more productive. It kind of took the emotion out of it, because we're humans too, and helped me move forward in a more positive way. So I found it a helpful resource. And that is it.